We invite people from our group, discuss the podcast, which is a great way. We always have people share it. We try to bring that conversation then to real time and bring up maybe a question or something about that relates to the podcast in the group. So all those conversations can kind of continue, and any thoughts that came up can kind of continue and be part of that conversation.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
What's up, podcaster? It's your host, Adam Adams, and today I'm joined with Maggie Nielsen, and we're going to be talking a little bit about her podcast and what she's doing to build her community. So it's called Women and Money, subtitle, The Shit We Don't Talk About. And ultimately, they talk about different parts of finances for women, like, for example, getting involved in real estate, having a good CPA, this and that, the things that kind of help you to be able to make more money or protect more money. That's what's talked about on the podcast. They are 40-something episodes in as we record today, and she's got a co-host. So one of the things that I want to find out is, who is the co-host? Why have a co-host? Is it hard having a co-host? Should you have one? So we've got a bunch of really good questions about working with guests, having a Facebook community, having your business attached to your podcast, and so much more. So let's jump in with Maggie Nielsen from Women and Money. How are you, Maggie?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to our conversation and talking about, you having a guest and what it's like to have a guest. I know some people that fail with guests and others that really succeed and they couldn't do it any other way. So I'm excited to get into that as well. Prior to recording, when we were in the green room, you mentioned that you like podcasting because it's a good way to share your message and to learn from others. Why don't we spend a little bit of time just talking about the benefits of podcasting as you see it?
Yeah, I think it's just such a risk to get your message out, get that education out that you really want to share. And then as a listener, it's always in your pocket. So you can always go back. If something is resonating with you at a certain time, you can always look it up. And there's so many different podcasts out there that there's so many different things to learn from, which I love that it's just a free resource in your pocket that you can listen to the gym, listen on a walk, whatever it is, and kind of be hands-free, but always learning. I'm a constant learner, so that's why I love a good podcast.
Me too. I like learning a lot. I think it's beneficial to us as humans to always be learning. I'm curious, why did you start a podcast in the very, very, very beginning? Did someone tell you to do it? Did you just know you needed to do it? What was your expectation and the why behind you launching?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely like thrown out to us that we should have a podcast. But after a while, it was something that I wanted to venture into because they're so evergreen. There's so much great information, but they're also kind of an easy way to get out that information. We just kind of record them when the timing's good and get those out to our community. So we thought it was a really good way to continue to spread our message, continue to educate, and then really shine that spotlight on some great guests that we have as well.
And so it sounds like almost every episode you have a guest with you. What is the purpose of having a guest? Why not just do it with you and your co-host?
Yeah. So we really bring the guest on for their expertise and their stories. We learn so much these days from storytelling and understanding what someone else has been through. And no person has been through all of it, but we all have our unique situations. And so we like to bring these professionals on to really share their expertise, to share their stories. And there's some that just always give you goosebumps or always just make you are so impressive. I just want to highlight these other amazing professionals that we have.
Do you take the time to highlight yourself as an amazing professional on your podcast? If so, how? How do you do that?
Oh, man, I guess not probably as much as I should. It's weird talking about yourself sometimes, I think. So it's easier just to ask somebody else all the intriguing questions. Yeah.
How do you feel being on someone else's podcast then?
I always really like it because there's always a new question. And just like you kind of prompted, it gets you thinking of different things that you wouldn't have thought of since, I'm always staying in my lane. And so now I'm kind of thinking like, okay, I should do an episode and highlight more of our own story because we are unique and different in our own ways.
Yeah. When I asked you basically, why did you start the podcast? You mentioned at least three things. One was that other people told you should. Another is that you like the evergreen content, that it can stay up there forever. And then the last one that I recall is that it helps build the community. And I want to stick on evergreen content for a sec and then building the community right after. So I want to understand, for example, are you careful to never say something like, this Friday, this is happening. It's Christmas. I'm so excited about whatever I'm going to get for my kids or whatever Santa's going to bring them. Or do you go ahead and leave those dates, but it's just the content, the value that can be evergreen? I want to kind of understand how strongly you feel about the word evergreen when it comes to podcasting.
That's a good question. A lot of it, I wouldn't be afraid of being like, oh, this is coming up, but I do think the content is very evergreen, which is really the most important part. Especially one of them is about tips for divorce. But we're first just chatting it up and getting into the conversation. It might not resonate with you now, but 2 years down the road, if you're going to start going through divorce, you might be like, oh, I should go back to that podcast and listen because now it resonates with me more. So it's more about having that value evergreen rather than like mentioning the dates or the time of the season.
Okay. So for the financial stuff, I know you have all sorts of different types of people that come on the show. I was reading one of your reviews, ratings and written review, and they were talking about an episode that came out about a month before you and I are recording, and it was rise in the financial industry. And I'm curious, like, do you try to make sure that, for example, that was Amy that you had on the show that time? Do you try to make sure that if you ask a question, that it's something that's going to be evergreen? And I'm going to give you one example. As we record, I recall just last week pulling up to the house while listening to the radio, which I almost never do. I usually listen to podcasts or book Audible. But this time, something happened. Maybe my phone wasn't plugging in, but I was listening to the radio. And as I was pulling up, there was some information about CDs, not compact discs, but certificate of deposit.
Right.
And the interest rate, I recall in my experience, dating me back way to when I was in high school and college, I was putting money in CDs and I was getting like 1 or 2 or 3%.
Yeah.
And then for a long time, it was like 0.5% to do a CD. And then as I was pulling up to the house, they were like, now you can get a 5%. Now you can get a 5%. So what I'm curious about is, would you have an episode where you had Amy or Adam or Emily or someone on the podcast and they were talking about right now, interest rates are this, or right now CDs are this rate. And now's a good time to put it in, knowing that someone may listen to it 10 years later and it could be totally late. What would you say there?
Yeah, I would still be open to talking about it since it is top of mind for student loans. Those were ever changing over the past couple years. And so we came on and we did some recording about that, but we know probably now it's different now because student loans are starting again. And so that information is different. I guess not every episode is evergreen, but you really want to, I guess, hit more what's top of mind, to some of your listeners as well. You want to really feed into that.
Cool. Do you ever purposefully, going with that, on purpose, search out something that is top of mind for everybody? Like, what is everybody searching for now? Is it this sports thing? Is it this news thing? Is it this president thing? And then do a topic idea about that to get more downloads right now, even though it may not be evergreen in a few years?
We definitely try to, depending on kind of what's happening in the world. And if there's a topic that we've kind of heard people want to listen about, but we haven't done yet. I think sometimes we are challenged by finding a true expert in that area who can speak to these topics. And sometimes that's just the hardest thing, is to get that expert in and around the right time and all those different things.
That makes a lot of sense. Moving to community, because you said that was one of the reasons why you launched the show. And I know you have a Facebook group as well, which the link will be in the show notes as well for the listener right now. How do you intentionally build a community through your podcast?
Yeah. So we invite people in the group, which is a great way. And then, we always have people share it and leave reviews, which we know helps increase all our listeners. And so we try to bring that conversation then to real time and bring up maybe a question or something about that relates to the podcast in the group. So all those conversations can kind of continue, and any thoughts that came up can kind of continue and be part of that conversation.
And do you try to monetize with the community, or like let's just say I'm a listener and I don't yet have a community. Maybe I don't have the podcast yet either, but finding a way to be successful through my business, through my podcast, through my community is something that anyone would probably be asking themselves. When you look at the community, how do you monetize it, or is it not important to monetize? What are your thoughts when building the community? And are there any additional tips that you could share with us to increase our value that we're giving to them?
Yeah. So the way our model works is we're not using our group as a revenue stream. We really wanted that to almost be like a free, safe space to ask questions about finances and not be pushed to product. So we are keeping clear of that. But we find as we grow, it's just like the more authentic you can be and your true, real self, we find things to grow. It's so easy to get some chat GPT prompts or questions and, not be that authentic anymore. And so just making sure you're coming through as authentic as possible is really key to get people to connect with your message.
Did you know that all of the questions I'm asking you came from ChatGPT?
I didn't know that.
I'm just messing. I actually only learned ChatGPT this week. I was at a mastermind group and I didn't ever really know what it does or what it exactly is capable of. And a lot of the people in the business mastermind, it's called Leadership Boardroom, they were talking about what they use ChatGPT with. And I'm like, I'll raise my hand and I have to admit, guys, I don't know anything about this. What is it? What do you do with it? And should I even be looking into it? And everybody said I should look into it. And even one gentleman, Mike, stayed after on the last day to kind of support me and run me through some stuff. And it's actually pretty remarkable. I don't mind it at all. Maybe I ought to get my questions from there.
I mean, it's a great tool to use. I think it can really help like get the wheels turning, get some questions and things like that. But there's a couple like blogs I've seen people write and I'm like, this is straight out of AI. Like, you don't talk like this. This is not consistent with your messaging. But it's a great foundation to kind of get started, I think.
So how can you tell that that's not how they sound? And A, how can you tell? B, isn't there a way to prompt ChatGPT to sound like you?
So to start with your second question, I think there's a lot of ways where you can make it sound like you. I think there's a lot of sound like this and use this verbiage. There's a lot you kind of have to plug in, but then it will make it happen. But there was some like verbiage and just words that were used that I was just like, none of your other messaging kind of comes through like this. So it just kind of stuck out like a sore thumb to me of words that I'm like, I've got your newsletter for 2 years now and it's never sounded like this. This is either a new writer or badly prompted. I'm not quite sure which.
Okay. Well, I just asked ChatGPT what is a good question to ask a podcast guest. And it said that there's a lot of versatile questions. It depends on the type of podcast. But then here's the main one that it did generate for me. Can you share a personal or professional story that illustrates the key message or lessons that you want the listeners to take away from this episode? That's a pretty freaking good question.
Yeah, I guess it is. ChatGPT is coming through right now.
All right. Well, so I guess I will ask that one question from ChatGPT. Can you illustrate what you want, a story that would help the listener actually have a takeaway from the episode?
Well, I mean, I guess I'll just share from doing my podcast, hearing women take action after listening to an episode, realizing there's more options or opportunities out there has really done the messaging that I've wanted to do with my podcast is to get women to take action. And so I would say that's a success. And for anyone else who's really trying to get people to take action, maybe a podcast is the route for you to go, as long as that feels true and authentic to the messaging you like to use.
I want to switch to business partners and co-hosting, if you don't mind.
All right.
So once upon a time, so here's my story to share to help the listener gain something because ChatGPT is so smart. A long, long time ago, I had a business where there was 3 partners and we were closing on real estate deals. We wanted to raise equity, raise other people's money to close on these deals. And automatically, we believed that it would need all 3 of us. Let me be honest. I don't know if we believed that it needed us or not. Mm-hmm. It is possible that me, who was launching it, was going to feel bad about cutting out my partners because hosting a podcast sounded so fun to me. I didn't want them to feel left out. So anyway, I decided to launch podcasts with 2 co-hosts, and we did mostly interviews like you do, mostly interviews. And as we continued to grow the podcast, every now and again, one of my co-hosts couldn't attend. They had another thing that was important. And that happened more and more frequently over time until they finally said, do you just want to do the podcast by yourself? And I was like, hell yeah. I've always wanted that. but I didn't dare to ask you guys because I thought you would think it was an ass. So I finally got it so where they were like, hey, we're out. You do it by yourself. You like it enough. And it actually was a relief to me to do it on my own. And I want to get the whole stories, like the ins and outs, the why, the how, the who, about launching your podcast. Was it Barbara or Maggie that decided to have a podcast? Who's the co-host? Who's the host? Whose idea is it? If someone ever misses, who misses? I'm really curious about how it works in your business because Barbara's your business partner and she's your co-host. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is.
Give us some of the ins and outs of what's good or what's bad about having a partner, who you chose, why did you choose that, whose idea was it? And I'm just going to let you talk for a couple minutes.
Yeah, it's something I think I kind of brought to the table. I was definitely thinking about, but I knew it was something that she wouldn't be opposed to doing either. And so thought it was a good opportunity to kind of promote a bit more and to get our message out. And so we talked from the beginning that both of us would be on the show together since we are both business partners. So we're both co-hosts together. And so we're also a mother-daughter team. And so sometimes I think in our messaging, since we know each other so well, we know kind of which part who's going to take in what conversation. But I think one of the most essential things to really have is like everybody on screen, because then we can kind of look at each other and kind of give the nod of like, you take this, I take this, you can kind of see if they're starting to open their mouth and you'll stay quiet. Because there's definitely some times where we'll talk over each other, of course. But, there are some recordings where it's like, ooh, I would kind of have taken this in a different direction, not bad or good, just like different route of questions where maybe they beat me to it and kind of went a different route. I wouldn't say the episode turns out bad, it was just different than I planned, but we all have our own kind of agenda, I guess, in the back of our heads, right?
I didn't like that at all. I remember 2 times out of around approximately 300 episodes that I did with other people. I recall 2 times that I knew for sure what direction to take it. I was about to take it. I didn't tell anyone because I'm just that smart, just to keep it to myself. I didn't tell anyone. And then I felt like it got derailed and less value because we didn't get to some of the points that I thought would be the most impactful for the listener. Has that happened to you yet, or has it not happened to that same degree?
I wouldn't say it's happened to that same degree, but definitely before recording, it's like, these are the things we want to get out of it.
Smart.
I'm always like, let's make sure it's really teethy. Like, this is the shit we don't talk about. Like, I don't want it to be just ground level. Like, I want it to be like teethy and good.
Give me an example of teethy and good. I have teeth, and so I'm teethy, but I don't understand the definition that you're using. I could probably ask ChatGPT and he or she will know. But what do you mean by teethy? And what's one example of how you got it more teethy?
We don't like any stories that are just kind of ho-hum, average day for the average Joe. Something that's like, I paid down $120,000 of debt in a year. Oh, that's something that happened. Or I left this marriage by selling the rocks in my ring to pay for my attorney. Like, that's an interesting story. Not like, oh, I got divorced and it was really hard, but now I'm here. It's like, all right, I need some more to that than just a regular story. So what makes it interesting? What makes it good? What advice would you give? And have some emotion come through.
Okay. One of the things that you mentioned was that you like to have video feed. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Do you publish the video or not? And if the case was that you don't publish video at all, why would you still want to record using video for all parties?
So we do record with video, but we don't use the video. And we just like to do it so we can see each other while having this conversation, to kind of see who's talking and to be part of that conversation. I think it's too distracting if you don't have the video on, then kind of go all over the place. So it kind of keeps you there in the conversation.
Cool. And one thing that you started to mention is you can kind of see if somebody's like raising their hand or taking a breath or about to speak. And that has helped. It doesn't solve it 100%, but it takes a lot of the chances of you talking over somebody because they can see. Is there any other benefit to having video if we're not going to publish the video?
Probably not. I mean, I just
Okay.
like to see the person talking, the personality come through, see if they're getting excited and jazzed up about it.
Okay.
But I think we get a lot from someone's facial expressions as well. So it's just great to see them along the way.
Let's switch gears here to your Facebook group. I think you mentioned, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I think that you mentioned that in the Facebook group, you talk about the podcast, and on the podcast, you talk about the Facebook group. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we do a little bit on each side.
So which one do you want to grow more? Just out of curiosity, which one do you care about the most, the podcast or the Facebook community?
The podcast.
How come?
I think it's just something that I really enjoy doing. So I like when something that you genuinely enjoy doing is the one that kind of takes off. So then everything just becomes easier. It kind of becomes that flow. It's a great way to get that messaging out, and it's on everyone's own time. Not like I dislike the Facebook group, but I don't know. I just like the podcast.
Okay. Is there any other thought leadership platform that you plan to own or control in the next 5 years? I'll throw out a couple of examples: blogs, books, YouTube channel. Are there any other thought leadership platforms on top of the podcast and the Facebook community that you think you kind of see yourself doing in the next 5 years?
I think one of them would really be just growing our Instagram as well. But I do not like writing. And so it's not going to be a book. It's not going to be a blog. And so probably just more social media like Instagram.
At this same mastermind group that I mentioned to you, I've been writing the same book for probably 5 years. And I've hired, it sounds like a long book. And I've hired 2 different ghostwriters to support this.
Yep.
And it isn't to fruition quite yet. And I hold myself back because I'm not much of a writer. But I'm going to try to be an inspiration, even though I'm just jumping back into the book. At my mastermind, I let people know I've been writing the same book for this long. It's not published yet. I need to do that. And everybody went around the room. I got tons of advice. Hire a ghostwriter. Yeah, I've already got 2. And they would say this, they would say that, and they would ask, how much time have I spent on it? And here's the coolest thing about how my book is getting written. And being dyslexic myself, of course,
Same.
Nothing's perfect. I assumed that as well, Maggie. I made the assumption. Here's what ended up happening. Somebody, the second ghostwriter, they asked me which episodes has the type of content. So all I did in the beginning is I said, chapter 1, listen to this episode and this episode. Chapter 2, listen to these 3 episodes. Chapter 4, listen to that episode, or whatever. So I outlined any episodes that had anything to do with that content, and I got a first draft. Now, there were some problems in there that I have to correct, and that's what's stressing me out. That's what's slowing me down. But I will say that I at least got a really good first draft of the entire book without any of my own efforts. So if you ever do need to write a book, reach out to me. I'll put you in touch with the people that I've been working with.
I hear a lot about people who they take all their podcast episodes, put them into transcripts, and then make that into a book. I mean, there's so many people who are like, you need a book. Here's a ghostwriter. Here's a 12-week program. Here's a this. Here's a that. But kind of like podcasting after a while, I feel like everybody and their brother has a book, and it's just not my thing.
Cool.
But I can't wait to see yours come out. I'll be ready to purchase it.
You're stressing me out now. I hope I do get it, because I left the mastermind with an actionable item that I need to take care of. And that is to hire the ghostwriter to just tell them the problems that are in there. And I'm almost ready. I've got like 8 more chapters to go with them. So that'll be fine. It should hopefully take me just a few weeks. With the Facebook community, what do you do to grow that? Is it just the podcast, or are you private messaging people? Are you calling people? Are you sharing it with people? Like, what are you doing to kind of grow the Facebook group?
Yeah. So we definitely have like an automated message when they come in the group to come reach out, always here to help. And then we do a lot of Facebook Lives every week. So we do one every week where we bring on another professional. And so that way people can come, they can ask questions, they can really talk to the expert there. And since we work with a lot of financial professionals, we try to show that they're not all stuffy and corporate all the time. We're just having an easygoing conversation, which is really fun to have.
So you're mentioning about doing a Facebook Live every week, but you said to me in the green room that you're publishing the podcast just about every other week. Why don't you repurpose the content that comes from those Facebook Lives and use it for the podcast so that you can have even more regular podcast schedule?
It's definitely something we've been talking about since why create double the content for no reason. But some of the conversations are just a little bit different. But I think going into the next year, that is something that we're going to do. So we're not spinning our wheels all the time. And it is a great way just to repurpose that content and make sure it really gets out to the audience.
And just a question about it. Let's just say you have somebody named David and then somebody named Amanda week to week. And this is who's coming on Facebook. Do either of those recordings become the podcast, or do you interview the same person another time, like whoever the names were, Amanda, or maybe I said David? Okay, you have got a good memory. Do those become the podcast episode, or do you have two different conversations with one of those people? Or third way that I see that it could be going is that they're completely separate, like David and Amanda never come on the podcast, and it might be an afterthought and somebody else does. How do you work on that content that way?
Yeah. So if David and Amanda recorded, neither of those would turn into the podcast. But if one of them did have like an interesting story, maybe a couple months later, they would be on the podcast telling that story. But it's usually David, Amanda, and then Billy as well.
Okay.
Get all those things done.
Got it. And I was curious if your intention is to serve the listener or if it's to serve the guest or both. And then once you answer that, how is that done on the podcast content?
I would say it's to serve more the listener than the guest, but of course the guest always benefits as well for being on the podcast. And so what was the second question there?
Yeah. So is it that you're helping the listener, or if you're wanting to work with the listener, or if you're wanting to work with the guest, or both? And then the other question is, how do you make that happen? Whatever the goal is, how do you make the goal happen?
Yeah. So it's really more for the listeners. And so then that way we just promote it out to them, get some ideas of what they are interested in hearing or what common questions that they have coming up, and just sharing it with more people out there.
Let's do a quick break. And when we be back, ChatGPT obviously gave me that copy. When we be back, we're going to ask you some more questions and wrap it up. We'll see you right then. Hey, my friend, as you know, this episode is sponsored by my company, growyourshow.com. We want you to be able to have the best tools at your disposal without costing you a whole arm and a leg. So right now you can get a free list of vetted equipment that like mics, mixers, webcams, sound treatment, editing software, everything that you need. I created the whole PDF with direct purchase links just to save you time and money, to help it be more convenient for you. So this free PDF will help you skip all the guesswork. If it's on there, it's vetted and approved by yours truly. And if it's not on there, it's probably not worth the money. So go ahead and get yours at growyourshow.com/PDF. Let's get back into the show. We're back with Maggie Nielsen, and I wanted to find out what types of things she's talking about on her podcast. It's called Women in Money, the shit we don't talk about. And I asked Maggie, I said, hey, what is an example of something that women usually miss? And kind of like the benefit, why should they listen to your podcast is the real question here.
Yeah. So one thing that we have been talking about, which will also be in one of our upcoming episodes, is caregiving and how that much affects women, because it's typically the oldest daughter who will take care of an aging parent, but they're usually also taking care of children as well. And for those who don't know, our baby boomers are getting older now. So 10,000 people are turning 65 every day, and it'll be like that for the next 7 years. And so that cost of caregiving typically falls on women, which means they have less money for retirement. They take time out of the workforce. Their investments grow less, all these different things besides the emotional and the physical taxing of caregiving itself.
And one of the things that you're saying is that falls more on the ladies than the men?
Yep.
Like the caregiving does? Why do you think that is? Is that something that needs to be fixed, or is that the right way to have it?
I think it's because we kind of have that nurturer in us. I think part of it is that we are always kind of known stereotypically to be the caretaker, especially since we're the one, having children, usually staying at home with the children. It just makes sense we stay at home with the parents as well. I don't know how it's going to be fixed. I think it needs to be a huge thing across the country, either paying for leave when people are caregivers or having more funding for the elderly and getting them the right care. So it's a big problem just overall, but knowing about it and financially planning for it so women can still stay on the path for retirement, that we can support each other knowing that we're going through this.
And I'm looking at another one of your podcast episodes, and it's saying championing female business ownership.
Yep.
And you and your mom co-own a business together. What was, for example, a takeaway that was kind of impactful that you did with Deb on that episode?
Yeah. So Deb was talking about how you can actually buy an already profitable business, and women are really great in coming in and doing that since there's so much just organization and different things like that. So you don't always have to start from the ground up. And so I didn't even know that was really like an opportunity out there. And then she focuses on helping women get that small business loan to make that happen, as less than 1% of VC funding actually goes to women. So she helps make sure we get the funding to buy these profitable businesses.
Very interesting. So she helps women, or maybe anyone, buy an already existing business. Did she talk about any concerns? Because I feel like if you try to buy a business, maybe without the knowledge or the know-how of how to understand if it is profitable or not, maybe you could get yourself into a lot of trouble. You could lose money, for example. So
Totally.
Was there anything like that happened on that episode that we could talk about?
She talks through all of that about how you kind of go through the finances, understand that how it is profitable, the way it works with the way the books look today, and how this is becoming a great opportunity for women, as so many, like I said, of these boomers are retiring and they have these great running businesses, but don't really have that succession plan. And so it's really important for towns to keep these businesses running that have always been there, that have always been helping the community. And so she does walk through all those finances, making sure that you are buying something profitable. It's not just going to be a huge loss, as it is no small feat, as we know, owning a business or buying a business.
Yeah. With your podcast, I want to go back to just like understanding just some of the things that you've learned over the series of time, because as I'm looking at this, you have like 42 episodes, and if they come out every other week, it sounds like you've almost been going at the podcast for like 2 years or getting close.
Just about.
What do you do for like editing? What do you use to record? What is the kind of like the process look, and who handles what, especially with you and Barbara?
Yeah. So we just use Zoom to do the audio, kind of like we're doing today. But we both knew from the beginning, audio editing was not something either of us wanted to touch. We knew it could just eat up hours. That is not our expertise in any way. So we hire a team that does all the editing for us, publishes it for us, and does some social media as well for it, which has been amazing to work with, well as like just having that off my plate. So it's so great when you just do the recording, you upload it, and you're just kind of hands-free by that point.
All right. So you use Zoom and you have somebody else do the audio editing. They also do, you said, social media for you. What other steps are we missing that either you handle, your mom handles, or you have moved off to a third party?
Yeah, I mean, we work on finding our own guests. So that's something we're always doing. Either Barb or I will reach out to find these different guests. And then we just come up with some questions, usually collaboratively together. But once it's recorded, it's really just off our plate and sent over to somebody else to deal with. And they do the intro, the outro, any commercials in the middle, any times we talk over each other, different things like that.
So are you recording multiple tracks in your Zoom? You are. And that helps if you guys are talking over each other too.
Definitely.
Because when you have like 3 tracks, 3 people at a time, it can get really hard to not be talking over each other. And so at least you'll be able to mute one or pull one down or separate them so that both people can speak. Interesting. I like that. So you guys find your own guests. You record it on Zoom on multi-track. Then you get the piece, you send it to your team. Your team does ads and things like that. Mm-hmm. Intro, outro, the music, cutting out some ums and ahs, or anytime you're talking over each other. I want to find out more about with that process for the people that are editing your podcast and publishing it. Do you have like a Canva account for the promotional materials, or how do they get the promotional materials, or do they even make any promotional materials?
So they make all the promotional materials for our podcast.
Okay.
So they made the covers. They had some, original images that they liked. And then after a bit, I went back to them and I was like, hey, these aren't really hitting home anymore. Like, here are some other ones that I see out there that I like, but also you guys are the experts in this area. So I'd love your input. So they came back with, 5 fresh new designs. And I was like, perfect, let's go. And so those are kind of implemented now. So it's just one of those constant communications, keeping the door open, letting them know what you're liking, what you're not liking. There's no point to complain about it if you're not asking for what you really want.
Where do they post on social, and what types of content is being posted on social? When I say where, that there's TikTok, LinkedIn, and a dozen more. When I say what type of content, there's words, there's links, there's pictures, and there's videos, audiogram/videogram. So how are they promoting your podcast?
So they'll post them on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and they'll do usually like a static image that's more of a quote, usually an image with our guest on there as well. And then they'll do one of those like reels or video images kind of with the text coming across the screen being highlighted. And so you have the audio of the podcast on there as well.
Do they do all 4 on the same day? Do they do one in each place? Like, how does that look exactly?
They all go on each platform. And so one is like the day it's released, one's a couple days later. I think there's 4 posts spread out between 2 weeks. And so every
that makes
2
sense.
weeks, we have a new podcast come out, and then there will be like the 4 new images or graphic videos that go with it.
Cool. And as far as ads, this would probably be the last place that we go on the episode. You said that sometimes they do the ads, and I was curious if you're randomly getting paid for ads that other people are looking at, or if you have your own ad, or if you've partnered with somebody who is placing ads on the podcast. You know them well, you know their business, or you don't know them at all, or is it your own stuff?
So we've partnered with a couple people who've paid to put their ads in our podcast. And so they'll just send us kind of the script that they're looking for, and then our podcast team will record that for them, make sure it's in the middle. We also have some like compliance disclaimers sometimes at the end that they'll tack on as well.
Do you mind going into a bit more detail on that? So you've partnered with a couple of people.
Yep.
How did you get those people to partner with you?
Yeah, there are other people in our community who have really been enjoying our podcast, who have their own businesses and wanted to advertise. So we put a deal together for a little bit and see how it went. And they were all sold. So it was a great way to kind of have the podcast pay for itself and a little bit more. And so it's been really good. It's just kind of getting that consistency throughout is kind of the next step.
And then you also said that, I think this is a direct quote, but I might be missing a word here or there. My team recorded it. So it sounds like it's not a host read ad. It's not Barbara. It's not Maggie. Whose voice is it, and why did you choose to go that way?
It's some women on our podcast team. And so we wanted it just to kind of be a third party, to be an interruption between just our 2 voices. I do know sometimes it's a little bit more authentic when you kind of have the host read the ad, as sometimes it sounds, I think, like they're almost using the product all the time. But we just wanted someone who had, really clear, good voice to come in and do the middle for the advertisements.
Okay. And so you reached out to them, you gave them a price, they agreed to it. Was there like a contract of this is going to go for 3 weeks, or this is going to go for 12 months, or anything else like that?
Yeah, we told them that they would get like these 2 episodes. They wouldn't be consecutive episodes though. And part of, I think a couple of the social media promotions were also like sponsored by, with their name on it as well, just to get them a little bit more promotion. And we also then in our newsletter put out like this podcast sponsored by so-and-so. So they do get that visibility.
Cool. And would you recommend to the listener to try to have a sponsor? And if so, and if they're concerned, I'll definitely have some more questions, but would you recommend that we try to get our podcast sponsored by somebody?
I mean, if you can get your podcast to be paid for itself, I don't see anything bad about that. It is your messaging. So just make sure that it's not something that you wouldn't back yourself. Somebody was like, maybe you should have Manscaped be on your podcast. And I was like, that has nothing to do with our community.
Somebody said that to you?
Yeah. And so I was like, that might not be it, but maybe we'll go a different route.
What if there was a woman who was like, I really want my husband to not be an ape anymore, so I will get the Manscaped thing?
I mean, there's a
No.
thousand other podcasts
All
that
right.
they might sponsor. It's not all around, but we all have different
Cool.
things. So we try to just stay in our lane.
Good. I like that. I agree with staying in your lane, like having the thing that you're good at to focus on. One last question about the ad.
Yep.
When we had our advertisement in this podcast 5-10 minutes ago, we paused. We said, we'll be right back. Is that how you do it? Or do they splice it just anywhere that they can try to figure out? Or how or when? Is it go in the beginning? Does it go in the end? Does it go in the middle? And is there a dedicated commercial break? Or is it just put it somewhere?
Yeah. So at first it was kind of like just put it somewhere, kind of find that middle. We tried to do it in the middle. So it's kind of a break, find a good stopping point. But I think moving forward, that is something we're going to kind of focus on is like, let's take the break while recording to make it sound a bit better. It doesn't sound like it kind of jumped in the middle there. But I think those are things that you learn as you grow. You don't always think about, taking that step, especially when you're recording and you're really into a conversation, you kind of get caught up. And so it is something that we're going to work on kind of implementing going forward.
The podcast is Women and Money, the shit we don't talk about. The hosts are Maggie Nielsen, who's been our guest today, and Barbara. I don't even know if I could say the last name. Provost?
Yep.
Okay, cool. I lived in a city called Provo.
Okay.
And there was a street there. So it's kind of like Provost.
Yeah.
No, that's a dumb joke. All right, let's just keep moving. All right, to my listener, the links to the podcast and to Maggie's website and to the Facebook community, those are in the show notes. So just scroll down and you can connect with her, get her bio, and also go and check out the podcast. Additionally, the next episode's a pretty short episode and it was curated just for you. I want to make sure that I'm always adding value to you. So it's just a solo episode, very, very short. I will see you there. I really don't say this nearly enough. I don't mention this and I feel horrible because it's a great resource for you to be able to take your podcast to the next level. And it's simply a free resource that I don't need your email or anything. It's just a podcasting course that I created that is ended up putting in the very first 6 episodes of this podcast. So if you haven't checked it out, definitely going to want to just check out those first 6 episodes, see how they can help you improve your podcast, get in front of more people, and have a better result where you're making more money through the podcast, etc. So much can happen after you listen through episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if you haven't done it, go do it now. And by the way, if you're subscribed, you'll keep hearing more great content. So to those of you who are, I'll see you on the next episode.